I've been a trucker for a long time, long enough to have seen my fair share of strange things out on the road. Accidents, near misses, weird loners hitchhiking at 3 in the morning. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever come close to what happened to me back in 2018. I've told this story maybe a handful of times, mostly to other truckers at late-night stops, the kind of guys who've seen some weird stuff themselves. Even then, I always feel like they don't believe me. Hell, I wouldn't believe me either. But I swear on my life, this is exactly how it happened. I was hauling a load of construction materials from Nebraska to Utah, cutting through miles and miles of empty plains. It was one of those routes where you could go hours without seeing another car, just the occasional gas station or lonely little town that seemed like it was barely holding together. I had planned on stopping for the night, but a big storm was rolling in behind me, and I figured I could outrun it if I just kept driving. It wasn't the smartest move, but I was behind schedule, and the last thing I wanted was to spend the night parked somewhere, listening to the wind rattle my rig like a tin can. I had been on the road for hours when I saw the first sign of something weird. Up ahead, just barely visible in the glow of my headlights, was what looked like a man standing on the side of the road. At first, I thought he was just another hitchhiker. Maybe someone's car had broken down, and they were trying to flag someone down. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. The guy wasn't waving, wasn't trying to get my attention at all. He was just standing there, perfectly still, his back straight, his arms hanging at his sides. I slowed down slightly as I passed him, just enough to get a better look. He was tall and thin, almost too thin, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that looked out of place in the middle of nowhere. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes. Jesus, his eyes. They were locked straight ahead, unblinking, staring at something I couldn't see. I felt a chill run down my spine as I drove past. Something about him just felt wrong. I couldn't explain why, but every instinct in my body was screaming at me to keep driving. So I did. I put my foot down on the gas and didn't look back. A few miles later, I started to calm down. Maybe he was just some weirdo, or maybe I was just overtired and letting my imagination get the best of me. I reached over for my thermos, took a swig of coffee, and tried to shake the feeling creeping over me. I was just starting to convince myself that I was being paranoid when my radio crackled to life. A voice, thin and static-filled, whispered through the speaker, "Why didn't you stop?" I nearly swerved off the road. My CB had been off. I was sure of it. I fumbled for the dial, turning it off completely, but my hands were shaking. I didn't like this. I didn't like this at all. I drove for another half hour, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The storm had finally caught up to me, the wind howling outside, rain starting to splatter against the windshield. I was debating whether I should pull off at the next stop when I saw something up ahead. Another figure, standing on the side of the road. My heart started pounding. It couldn't be the same guy. That was impossible. I had been driving at nearly 70 miles an hour. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. But as I got closer, I felt my stomach drop. It was him. The same thin frame. The same pale skin. The same empty stare. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to keep going. This time, I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes locked on the road, refusing to even glance at him as I sped past. My hands were slick with sweat. My breathing was shallow. I felt like I was being hunted, like something was playing with me. I checked my mirrors. He was standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I slammed my foot on the gas, my whole body rigid with fear. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. I had to get to the next truck stop, had to get somewhere with people. I didn't care if I was losing my mind. I just knew I couldn't be alone on this road any longer. I drove faster than I ever had before, the rain hammering down on my windshield, my tires skidding slightly against the wet asphalt. The wind howled outside, and for a moment, it almost sounded like laughter. I was gripping the wheel so tight my fingers hurt when the radio crackled again. A low voice, barely more than a whisper, slid through the static. "Stop the truck." I yanked the radio cord from the dashboard so hard it nearly snapped. The voice cut off instantly, but my pulse was racing. I had never been more terrified in my life. And then, just as I was starting to think I was in the clear, something moved in my passenger side mirror. A shape. Inside my cab. I barely had time to react before the engine died. My headlights cut out. The dashboard went dark. And in the suffocating blackness, I heard breathing. Slow. Steady. Right behind me. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My truck was completely dead. No headlights, no dashboard glow, no engine rumble. The rain smacked against the windshield in uneven bursts, the wind howling like some distant animal. But none of that mattered, because I wasn't alone in the cab. I could hear it, a slow, steady breathing, just behind me. I didn't turn around. Every instinct I had screamed at me to keep my eyes forward, to not look, to pretend I didn't know. Maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. Maybe I had fallen asleep at the wheel, and this was some kind of nightmare. But then, something shifted in the sleeper behind my seat. A slow, deliberate movement. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The cab was too small. Whatever was back there was close enough to reach me if it wanted to. I had to move. I had to do something. Without thinking, I reached for the ignition and twisted the key. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. And then, a whisper, so close I felt it against my neck. "Why didn't you stop?" I spun around so fast my shoulder slammed into the door. But there was nothing. The sleeper was empty. The blanket on my bunk was undisturbed. The little overhead light flickered slightly from the motion of the truck rocking in the storm, but there was no one there. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had imagined it. That maybe I was so sleep-deprived that my mind was playing tricks on me. And then, in the corner of the sleeper, I saw it. A wet footprint on the fabric of my mattress. Small, bare, and facing toward me. My chest tightened. I scrambled back around, grabbing the ignition with shaking fingers, twisting the key over and over and over again. The truck wouldn't start. The cab felt smaller now, like the air was being sucked out of it. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers so numb I almost dropped it. I had to call someone, the police, a tow truck, anyone, but as soon as I unlocked the screen, my stomach dropped. There was already a message open. I hadn't touched anything, hadn't opened my texts. But there it was. A single message, sent to an unknown number. "You should have stopped." I felt my pulse spike so hard I almost passed out. I didn't type that. I hadn't even been holding my phone. And then, a knock on my window. Not the driver's side. The passenger's side. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I turned my head inch by inch, my breath catching in my throat. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could barely make out the silhouette of a man. Tall, thin, standing completely still in the storm. It was him, the man from the road. I felt my entire body lock up. The way he stood there, motionless, his face obscured by the rain and darkness, it felt wrong. Like he wasn't just outside the truck. Like he was everywhere. I slammed my hand against the door lock, double-checking that it was secure, my mind racing. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself if he tried to get in. And then, I noticed something. The passenger side door handle. It was slowly turning. I lunged for the glove compartment, yanking it open, praying I had something in there. A flashlight, a wrench, anything. My fingers brushed against cold metal, and I almost cried with relief. My old tire iron. I grabbed it and turned back toward the window, ready to swing if I had to. But the man was gone. The door handle was still. The road outside was empty. I sat there, gripping the tire iron so tightly my hands started to cramp. The storm continued to rage, but the air in the cab felt different now. Heavy, pressurized. Like something was still inside with me. And then, my radio crackled to life again. Static at first. Then, a voice. But not his voice. A woman's. Distant. Warbled. Like it was coming from underwater. "Please, stop." My breath hitched. The static deepened, and another voice, a child's this time, whispered through the speaker. "He doesn't like when they don't stop." I threw the radio mic across the cab. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned the key in the ignition one last time. And the truck roared to life. The headlights came back on. The dashboard flickered. The engine hummed like nothing had happened. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot on the gas. I sped through the storm, my hands locked on the wheel, my eyes darting between the road and the mirrors. I expected to see him standing in the rear view, watching me drive away again. But I didn't. I drove until I saw the first truck stop. A big, well-lit place with other trucks parked in neat little rows. I pulled in, cut the engine, and just sat there, my body shaking. I didn't sleep. I didn't touch the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just waited for the sun to come up. By morning, everything seemed normal. My truck started fine. My phone didn't have any weird messages, and the radio was clear static. For a few minutes, I almost convinced myself it was all in my head, until I climbed out of the cab and saw the wet footprints leading away from my truck, like someone had stepped out during the night. like someone had been inside the whole time. I never took that route again, never talked about it until now. But sometimes, when I'm on a long stretch of highway, alone in the dark, I swear I catch a glimpse of something standing on the shoulder. Tall, thin, watching. I've been on the road for over a decade, and I've seen just about everything: bad wrecks, drunks walking the highway at 2 in the morning, weird hitchhikers that don't take no for an answer. But what happened to me last winter? That was different. That was something I still can't explain. I don't even like thinking about it. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of dairy products from Montana to North Dakota. It was one of those dead of winter trips where the air feels too cold to breathe, and everything outside the truck is just a blur of snow and darkness. The route took me through a long stretch of nothing: no towns, no gas stations, just empty highway and frozen fields stretching for miles in either direction. The storm had started slow, little flurries swirling under the glow of my high beams. But within an hour, it had turned into a full-blown whiteout. I had to slow to a crawl, my wipers barely keeping up with the snow piling onto my windshield. The road was slick, the sky was pitch black, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 40 miles. Then I saw the house. I almost missed it. It was set way back off the highway, just barely visible through the wall of falling snow. A big, old farmhouse, dark and abandoned looking, the kind that you just know has been empty for years. But there was something off about it. Something wrong. The front door was wide open. I don't know why, but that detail sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just cracked, it was hanging open like someone had left in a hurry. And for some reason, I could see just a little too far inside. The way my headlights hit the interior, it should have just shown a few feet into the doorway. But I swear I can see all the way to the back of the house, like the inside was stretching further than it should. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just overtired. But something about that place made my skin crawl. I forced myself to keep driving, my fingers tied around the wheel, my breath fogging up the cab. And then my radio crackled. Not my CB, my trailer's internal refrigeration system. It was an old, finicky unit that sometimes gave off weird static, but this was different. The noise coming through wasn't just static. It was whispering. I adjusted the dial, thinking maybe I had picked up some weird frequency by accident, but the voices only got louder. I couldn't make out words, just a low, overlapping murmur, like a dozen people were whispering at once. And then, in between the whispers, I heard it. A single word. Stop. I felt a chill settle deep in my gut. I yanked the dial, shutting the unit off completely. The cab was silent again, except for the sound of the wind howling outside. I told myself it was just interference. Just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But when I glanced in my side mirror, my stomach dropped. The house was still there, growing smaller as I drove away. But the front door? It was closed. I hadn't seen it move. Hadn't looked away long enough for someone to shut it. But it was shut tight. I felt sick. I pressed the gas, pushing through the storm, refusing to look back. For a while, nothing happened. I started to relax, convincing myself it was all in my head. The snow was still coming down hard, but the worst of the storm seemed to be passing. I figured I'd make it to the next town in an hour, maybe stop at a truck stop and shake off the nerves. And then my headlights caught something in the road. At first, I thought it was a deer. Just a dark shape up ahead, barely visible through the swirling snow. But as I got closer, my chest tightened. It wasn't a deer. It was a person, standing right in the middle of the highway. I slammed on my brakes, my tires skidding against the ice. The truck shuddered, the trailer swaying dangerously behind me, but I managed to stop just in time. The figure didn't move. I squinted through the windshield, my heart pounding. It was a woman, wearing a thin, white nightgown that billowed in the wind. Her skin was gray and sickly, her hair long and tangled, hanging over her face. She was barefoot. I couldn't understand how she was even standing out there in the cold. The temperature had to be close to -20, and she wasn't even shivering. I grabbed my flashlight, flicked on my hazard lights, and cracked my door open, the freezing wind ripping through the cab. "Ma'am," I called out, my voice barely carrying over the storm. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just stood there. I felt that same deep, instinctual fear from before. The same feeling I got when I saw the house. My gut told me to just drive around her, to not get involved. But I hesitated. What if she was in trouble? What if she had escaped from somewhere and needed help? I took a slow step down from the cab. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" I called again. The woman tilted her head slightly, like she was finally noticing me. The movement was unnatural, almost mechanical. Then she took a step toward me. Something about the way she moved made my stomach turn. It was wrong, too slow, too precise, like she was copying the way a person should walk. I took a step back, and then, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering. Not high, maybe just an inch or two, but enough. Enough to make me finally understand that this was not a person. I turned and bolted back into my cab, slamming the door and throwing the truck into gear. The second my foot hit the gas, my headlights flickered. For just a fraction of a second, the entire cab went dark. And in that moment, I felt her. Something cold and damp brushed against the back of my neck. A whisper, right against my ear. "Why didn't you stop?" The lights flickered back on. My truck lurched forward, my tires struggling for traction before finally catching. I sped past her, my breath coming in panicked gasps, my entire body trembling. I risked one last glance in the mirror. She was still standing there, still watching me drive away. But this time, she wasn't alone. There were others, dozens of them, standing in the field beside the road, barely visible through the snow. All of them wearing white, all of them staring in my direction. And as my taillights faded into the distance, I saw them start to move. Not toward the road, toward the farmhouse. I didn't stop, didn't breathe. I just kept driving. But even now, I can still hear that whisper in the back of my head. "Why didn't you stop?" I didn't stop driving. Not for a second. I kept my foot planted on the gas, my hands clenched so tight around the wheel my knuckles were white. The snow was still coming down hard, but I didn't care. I would rather skid into a ditch than slow down, because I knew if I stopped, something would happen, something I wouldn't be able to come back from. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see that woman still standing in the road, or worse, sitting in my back seat, staring at me through the glass. But the road was empty. The field was empty. Nothing but snow and darkness stretching for miles. I started whispering under my breath, not even sure what I was saying. Maybe I was praying. Maybe I was just trying to calm myself down, but it wasn't working. My heart was still pounding, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I needed to get to a town, a truck stop, somewhere with people. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the glow of distant lights on the horizon. A gas station. Small, but open. The kind of place with a flickering neon sign and an old, rundown convenience store attached to it. I pulled in too fast, my tires skidding slightly on the ice. My hands were still shaking as I threw the truck into park, turned off the ignition, and sat there, staring out at the snow-covered lot. The place looked deserted. One other car was parked off to the side, an old sedan, but I couldn't see anyone inside. I exhaled, forcing my fingers to unclench from the wheel. I needed to get my head straight. I needed to step outside, feel solid ground under my feet, maybe grab a coffee or something strong enough to burn this fear out of my system. I reached for the door handle, and then I heard it. A single tap on the passenger side window. I froze. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, like someone was just barely testing to see if I was awake. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Tap, tap. It was slower this time, more deliberate. I turned my head, every nerve in my body on fire. There was nothing there. The window was empty. No face pressed against the glass, no hand reaching for the door. Just my own reflection staring back at me. I exhaled sharply, forcing a laugh, trying to convince myself I was just hearing things. Maybe the wind had knocked a branch or some ice against the truck. I reached for the handle again. Tap. It came from the back of the cab this time. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my flashlight, threw the door open, and jumped down into the snow, spinning around fast. The parking lot was empty. The sedan was still sitting there, dark and still. The snow-covered ground was untouched, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been near my truck. I swallowed hard. I was losing it. I slammed the door shut and stomped toward the gas station, the cold burning my lungs with every breath. The glass door groaned as I yanked it open, stepping inside to the overwhelming scent of cheap coffee and cigarette smoke. An old man sat behind the counter, flipping through a newspaper. He barely looked up as I walked in. I made my way to the coffee machines, my hands still trembling as I poured myself a cup. I needed to calm down, needed to convince myself that this was all just exhaustion and stress. Then I heard the door chime. Someone else had come inside. I turned my head just slightly, enough to see a woman in white standing near the entrance. My blood turned to ice. It was her, the woman from the road. I didn't move. I didn't blink. She was just standing there, barefoot on the dirty tile floor, her tangled hair, hanging in front of her face. The old man at the counter didn't even look up. She took a slow step forward, the hem of her nightgown dragging against the floor. I felt my whole body tense, every muscle screaming for me to run. But I was rooted in place, the coffee cup shaking in my hands. Then, as if sensing my fear, she tilted her head toward me. And she smiled. Not a normal smile. Not human. Her lips stretched too wide, her teeth too small and too many, packed tightly together like a doll's. I dropped the coffee. The cup hit the floor with a dull splash, hot liquid spreading across the tiles. The old man finally looked up. "You okay?" I snapped my head toward him. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I looked back toward the woman. She was gone. The door hadn't opened. The chime hadn't sounded. She had just disappeared. The old man raised an eyebrow. "Son, you look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, threw some crumpled bills on the counter, and bolted back outside. My truck was still running. I didn't remember leaving it on, but at that point, I didn't care. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and pulled out of that parking lot so fast my tires fishtailed on the ice. I didn't stop until I was 3 towns away. I parked in a brightly lit rest stop, surrounded by at least a dozen other trucks. It was the first time all night I felt safe. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. My body was exhausted, my nerves completely fried. And then, a whisper, right in my ear. "We'll try again tomorrow." I turned the key, gunned the engine, and drove. I don't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just knew I had to keep moving. I've been on the road for 17 years now. Trucking is a lonely job, and after a while, you get used to the long, empty highways, the middle-of-nowhere gas stations, and the feeling that the rest of the world is happening somewhere far away from you. You also see things, weird things that don't make sense. But there's one night that I still can't explain, one night that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. This happened back in 2020. I had a late-night haul from Texas to Colorado, hauling a load of steel parts for a construction site outside Denver. It was an easy enough route, mostly straight highway, not much traffic, nothing but empty desert stretching out on either side of the road. I had been driving for hours, my headlights cutting through the darkness, when I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a road sign or a mile marker. But as I got closer, I realized it was a man standing on the side of the highway. Just standing there. His back was to me, his hands hanging at his sides. He was wearing dark jeans and a faded flannel shirt, and his hair was matted and messy, like he had been out there for a long time. I slowed down slightly as I passed him, my stomach twisting into a knot. There was something wrong about him, something that made my skin crawl. He wasn't hitchhiking, wasn't waving for help. He was just standing still, staring straight ahead at the empty road. As I passed, my headlights washed over him, and that's when I saw it. His feet weren't touching the ground. I hit the gas so hard my tires screeched against the pavement. I didn't look back. I didn't check my mirrors. I just drove. For the next hour, I kept glancing at my side mirrors, expecting to see something, anything, following me. But the road was empty. The desert was still. And then my CB radio crackled to life. At first, it was just static. Then, a voice. Not clear. Not normal. It sounded far away, like someone talking from the bottom of a well. "Where are you going?" My stomach clenched. My CB had been off. I was sure of it. I reached over, turning the dial, trying to shut it off completely. But the voice kept coming through. "You saw me." I slammed my fist against the dashboard, trying to keep my hands from shaking. This was not happening. I was just tired, just paranoid. I needed to get to a truck stop, get some coffee, clear my head. Up ahead, I saw a turnoff for a rest area. The sign was old and faded, the kind of place that probably hadn't been renovated in decades. But I didn't care. I needed to get off the road. I pulled in, parking near the dim glow of a single flickering streetlight. The lot was completely empty, not another truck in sight. A rundown restroom building sat near the edge of the lot, its door hanging slightly open. I killed the engine, exhaled, and rubbed my face. Then, in the sudden silence, I heard footsteps. Soft, slow, crunching against the gravel, coming from the back of my truck. I stopped breathing. Every hair on my body stood on end as I waited. The footsteps moved closer. And then, a knock on my door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My hands were slick with sweat as I fumbled to pull it out of my pocket. There was a new text, a message from an unknown number. Come outside. I dropped my phone. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I was going to pass out. The footsteps moved again. This time, they were circling the truck. I reached for the ignition, twisting the key so hard my fingers ached. Nothing. The truck was dead. And then, just outside my window, a shadow moved. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring straight ahead, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles felt like they would split open. Then, in the quiet, I heard a voice. Not from the CB, not from the phone, from right outside my window. Let me in. I sat there, paralyzed. The air in the cab felt thick, heavy, like I was sitting underwater. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, fogging up the glass in front of me. Outside, the shadow lingered just beyond my vision. I could feel it there, standing close enough to touch the door. Let me in, the voice repeated. Soft, almost polite, but something about it sent a deep, gut-wrenching terror through me. I didn't move, didn't breathe. A long silence followed. Then, tap, 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 knuckles against the glass, slow and deliberate. I stared straight ahead, my fingers locked around the wheel. Then the passenger door handle moved. A slow, testing jiggle. I don't know what kind of strength kicked in, but I lunged for the lock, double-checking that it was secure. My hand was slick with sweat, my pulse hammering in my ears. A low chuckle came from the other side of the door. You can't stay in there forever. I squeezed my eyes shut. Wake up. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I lifted it from my lap. The screen was still open to the message. Come outside. And then, right in front of me, the words on the screen changed. Look at me. I didn't. I couldn't. I gritted my teeth and reached for the ignition, twisting the key harder this time. The truck sputtered, coughing, struggling. Then, all at once, the dashboard flickered to life. My headlights flashed on, illuminating the empty lot. I didn't hesitate. I threw the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The tires skidded for half a second before catching, and the whole rig lurched forward. I couldn't resist. I looked in the mirrors. I shouldn't have. There, standing in the middle of the lot, was the man from the highway. His feet were still hovering above the ground. But this time, I could see his face. And Jesus Christ, I wish I hadn't. His mouth was too wide, his teeth too long and too many, his eyes black and hollow, like deep wells with no bottom. But the worst part? He was smiling. A grin so unnatural, so stretched and wrong that my entire body went numb. And then he started walking toward me. No, not walking. Sliding. His feet never touched the ground. He just glided, closing the distance between us too fast, way too fast. I floored it. The truck roared down the empty highway, my entire body shaking as I clutched the wheel. I didn't check the mirrors. I didn't listen to the radio. I didn't think. I just drove. For nearly 2 hours, I kept going. No stops, no slowing down. My muscles ached. My vision was starting to blur from exhaustion, but I didn't dare pull over. Eventually, I saw lights up ahead. A real truck stop. Dozens of rigs parked outside, warm yellow light spilling from the windows. Civilization. I pulled in and parked right next to a row of other trucks. My hands were still locked around the wheel, my knuckles aching. I let out a long, shaky breath. And then, just as I reached for my phone, the radio crackled to life. This time, the voice wasn't outside. It was inside the cab. You stopped. My throat closed up. A drop of cold sweat slid down my back. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sleeper berth. The curtain was open. I hadn't opened it. My vision blurred with panic, my breath catching in my throat. And then, I saw the footprints. Wet, muddy, leading from the bunk. I don't remember leaving the truck. I don't remember sprinting across the parking lot, bursting into the truck stop like a madman. All I know is that I didn't sleep that night. I stayed inside, surrounded by other people, drinking cup after cup of coffee, watching the lot through the window. When I finally went back to my rig in the morning, the footprints were gone. But the passenger door was unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. And that's why I don't drive through that part of Texas anymore. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if it was a ghost, or a demon, or something else entirely. But I know one thing. It got in.